everyone, welcome to PHTV Channel 4 in Palos Heights. I'm Sue Jankowski, and we are meet with Moraine, our program today. We always have somebody really interesting and special coming in and telling you all about different programs that they have at Moraine Valley Community College, which is nearby in Palos Hills, as I'm sure you already know. We're really excited because every month we are given the opportunity to learn something new about Moraine Valley Community College. And I think maybe today you'll learn something that maybe you didn't know you could get involved in, or at least learn something about. And that is the American Sign Language program. So both of our guests today are from the American Sign Language program at Moraine Valley Community College. First, right next to me, we have Shelley Ingram-Kestel. Welcome, Shelley, today.
Hi.
And she is the American Sign Language Interpretation Program Coordinator and an American Sign Language Interpretation Instructor. And then next to her, we have Terry Heading. Welcome, Terry, today.
Hello.
And she is an assistant professor of the American Sign Language Interpretation. So I guess first we like to start with a little bit about your background. How did you come to Moraine Valley Community College? How long have you been there? Just a little bit about yourself. Let's start with Shelley.
Sure. I'm Shelley Ingram-Kestel, and I am an American Sign Language interpreter. Have been an interpreter for almost 30 years now. Started my journey at Waubonsie Community College, is where I got my education initially. I continue on to get my bachelor's from Governor State and my master's degree from the University of St. Francis. My master's degree was in training and development, which is curriculum design. And my focus was in creating educational opportunities for interpreters who are in the field. And that kind of led me to developing and designing the program at Moraine Valley that has been in existence for approximately 10 years now.
Oh, quite a while. And how long have you been there at Moraine Valley?
About 10 years.
Okay. So
I developed the curriculum as a consultant and then was hired on as an adjunct and then became full-time.
Oh, fantastic.
Program.
Okay, well that is wonderful. And look, it's been there for 10 years, and for me, it's something I didn't realize. So I imagine our viewers feel the same way, that maybe they didn't realize that this was going on. Thank you. And then also, Terry, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, first of all, I do want to inform the audience that we do have a sign language interpreter here with us. I will be using sign language to respond to the questions, and we have our interpreter who will be interpreting from American Sign Language into English.
Great.
I have known American Sign Language since I was a little girl. It's my language. It's part of the deaf community's language. It's part of deaf culture. For me, growing up, I always appreciated when anyone who was not deaf was able to try and communicate with me using sign language. I hear people tell me often, oh, I wish I knew ASL, or I wish I took classes. I hear that very often, and that motivated me to become an instructor at Moraine Valley. I graduated from Gallaudet University, which is the only liberal arts college in the world for the deaf, and I have a master's degree in sign language education as well from Gallaudet, and I am now teaching at Moraine Valley.
Well, that's fantastic, and it's great to have you here. And I agree. I think a lot of people wish they had a knowledge of American Sign Language so they could talk to people that they don't have an opportunity to talk to. I understand that there are two programs at Moraine Valley Community College, the Deaf Studies Certificate Program and the American Sign Language Interpretation Program. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between these two programs?
The ASL Deaf Studies Certificate Program is intended for folks who want to learn American Sign Language and about the deaf community, to be able to use ASL and interact with members of the deaf community at their jobs. We've had some nurses and doctors and police officers take this so they can communicate with members of the community. Also, anyone who's interested in the language could get that certificate. And once you've completed, if you determine that you want to continue on and become an interpreter, you would then apply to the American Sign Language Interpretation Program, which is similar to nursing, where it's a selective enrollment program.
Okay.
And so you would have to have satisfied certain classes and achieve certain levels in your fluency with American Sign Language. to be able to enter the American Sign Language Interpretation program.
Okay, and do people usually do that? You know, they think, well, I don't know if I want to do this, so they start with the Deaf Studies certificate and then move along to the American Sign Language Interpretation?
Well, we recently, we made some programmatic changes and added the ASL Deaf Studies certificate in reaction to many folks who started out in the ASL interpretation program who then determined that interpreting wasn't for them, but they really loved the language and they wanted to use ASL and still work with the deaf community, but in a different capacity. And so we had a high need for folks who wanted to get something, but they didn't necessarily want to become an interpreter. Similar to, you know, you can talk to any little kid and they say they want to be a doctor, and they may end up starting out in a program to go into the medical field and not end up being a doctor, but in various different avenues in the field of medicine. And so we wanted to offer that option for folks in our program.
That's great. Okay, why do people, other than wanting to maybe communicate with a family member, which is a wonderful reason, what are the main reasons that students would choose the American Sign Language program?
That's a question that I ask all of my students in my classes, and we get a wide range of answers. Some of our students have family members who are deaf, and they want to be able to improve their communication, or they have neighbors that they live by who are deaf. They may be working in the education system, the K through 12, where they have deaf students there and they want to be able to interact, maybe attending school. I have a deaf friend there. They could be working anywhere, and, you know, a medical facility, police station, like Shelley mentioned, restaurants where you may encounter a lot of deaf people and you want to be able to communicate without the need for an interpreter. It could be a specific relationship. So, for example, my daughter, her boyfriend wants to learn American Sign Language so he can communicate with me. Nice. So again, you'll see a host of different reasons.
Yeah, that there's a motivation for a lot of people, you know, just very personal to their situation in life. Now, I really have noticed that there are so many more interpreters on television than there ever used to be. And sometimes they're at, you know, you understand when it's a big government, maybe a union, State of the Union address or something, you understand that. But I've been seeing them at just like the local news brief. And that having an interpreter there is wonderful for those people who would like to know more. Do you find that that's happening more? Like people want to get involved with that? Is that like an avenue that people are looking for a job in?
I mean, there's a huge need for interpreters. So the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, and that ensured that members of the deaf community, people with disabilities, would have equal access to anything that a person who is not deaf has access to. And that ensured that the provision of interpreters would be mandated, required. It was something that really changed the pathway of interpreting. And I think due to the pandemic, it became a little more realized because we had, you know, information that had to be shared, and we had to make sure that everyone had access to it, and providing an interpreter was, you know, the recommended way to be able to communicate with the members of the deaf community. So we do have a lot of folks who've now seen interpreters every day, and they understand that it's actually something that can be a career. Whereas before, and even today, I've been an interpreter for almost 30 years, where I often get asked if the person I'm interpreting for is a family member or a friend. They don't understand that this is a profession, and that you know, it does. You know, I pay my bills doing it, and I've been very successful and very happy. I love interpreting, and it's a viable profession. So I think having interpreters front and center has made it more of an awareness for folks who may be interested in learning sign language and using it for their career.
Yes, I would think so. That's very important.
If I could add too, people don't realize that there are deaf interpreters that they are watching on the news. They have certified deaf interpreters. So these are interpreters who are native users of American Sign Language, and they have experience within the deaf community in a wide range of subgroups, and they serve a diverse community, as opposed to an interpreter who may learn sign language through college, maybe take a few years of classes and then be involved with the deaf community, where their communication may not be equally as effective as a native user of American Sign Language. So you have a certified deaf interpreter working in conjunction with the hearing interpreter for more effective communication. Another example of that would be somebody who comes from another country who is deaf, and they have an interpreter with a certified deaf interpreter there to be able to mediate that communication. And they may feel a stronger connection with someone because they are both from a similar community, even though they use two different languages. And you have less of that communication breakdown. So that CDI profession, the Certified Deaf Interpreter profession, is a growing profession. And through COVID, you saw many deaf interpreters on the news to really make sure that they could match the audience of the diverse deaf community with those specific skills that they have.
Okay, so I want to understand this. So the native speakers can do an interpretation for like a news conference or like a medical conference. Okay, how do they get that information then?
They work in conjunction with a hearing interpreter as a team. And the interpreter who can hear and can speak, they will be listening to the information that is provided and provide it in sign language to the certified deaf interpreter, and they are able to provide the extra level of interpretation that would be an appropriate fit for the audience.
Oh, that is great, because someone who is native to speaking the language would do maybe a little bit different job than someone who isn't, or maybe the deaf community would feel better about that in some way. I don't know, but
I like to I think of it as I may have been interpreting and signing for almost 30 years, but I do not have the lived experience of being a deaf person. And how I view the world is through the lens of a person who can hear. And when you're interpreting meaning and topics, I will always have that spin of being a hearing person. I've never walked into a room being a deaf person. And so that's where, for me, when I work with the CDI, they're bringing that lived experience, that extra layer of understanding to make sure that the communication happens. There's that connection that is there where I can't have that connection because I've never been a 6-year-old child who was deaf. So I don't have those same experiences. So that's where, for me, when I work with CDIs, that's the value of having that deep cultural connection and lived experience in the community.
yeah, and I think that would be definitely an added asset. That's wonderful. Now, if you wanted to become and be like certified or be a sign language interpreter, is there a state test? Do you become certified? I would think so. I would think that outside of the school, there would be some sort of state guidelines or national guidelines that you would need to follow. How does someone who's attending Moraine Valley get to the point where they're becoming a certified instructor or a certified interpreter?
So in the state of Illinois, interpreting, much like x-ray techs, nurses, many in the medical field, it's a licensed profession. So in order to interpret in the community, you need to hold a license. And if you're going to work in a K through 12 setting, you need to be approved by the Illinois State Board of Education. So in order to do that, you get the training through the college, and then you would take an external test similar to what nurses would take. So they learn in the school, and then they take an external test that's assesses their ability to become certified. And so once you pass that assessment, then you apply to get your license in Illinois.
Okay. And then that would qualify you to go to a school system?
Depending on the nature of the test that you take, the Illinois is similar to if I'm a teacher at a college. I don't have to have the same type of certificate as I would to teach in a high school. So interpreting in the community would be a different level of, it's a license, and when you're working in the school, it'd be similar to having a certificate to teach in that school.
Okay.
So two different avenues depending on where you want to work. So there is one credential that does allow you to apply for both, and that's the credential that we train our students to be able to take, which is the Board of Evaluation for Interpreters, which is offered by the state of Illinois.
Okay, and that's what, if you're attending Moraine Valley, you've gone through the classes, that's the test you're going to take, which would open a lot of
Yes.
doors for you.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so, we've mentioned school jobs in the news, but what other kind of job? I mean, I just think about places like the airport and train stations, and there's so many places where someone who is impaired hearing could use a sign language interpreter. Where would you get a job today?
Anywhere a deaf person goes is where an interpreter can work.
Okay.
So if you're buying a car and you need to negotiate,
Yeah.
you have the right to request an interpreter. If you're going to a doctor's appointment, you can request an interpreter. I'm going to let Terry take this over. As a person who uses interpreting services, she can give more information about all of the
Yeah.
places she has to use interpreters.
Yeah, I use interpreters. I have used them all of my life for different reasons. One cool example would be the interpreters who could go scuba diving and interpret.
Wow.
Yeah, that's another good example.
It is.
You could go to a comedy show, or little shows you can bring your children with you. You can have interpreters there. Weddings, interviews for a job. I mean, literally, I could go on and on for all the different possible situations where I would use an interpreter.
Okay, so you're going to a wedding and you want to hear the ceremony and you want to know what's going on. Is there like a registry of interpreters that you go to? I mean, how do you find somebody?
That's a great question. When I got married in California at the time, and so I had to do some research online. I found an interpreting agency that provided interpreters, so I contacted them to find someone for my wedding. So they were able to find 2 interpreters that were there at my wedding, and they interpreted for the entire event, and vows included, even the music. So we were able to interact with all of our family and friends throughout our special day.
Oh, that is wonderful. So there is a way to get a hold of somebody. But that would seem like it opens a lot of possibilities for people looking to have a career in interpretation, especially now when it's people who have hearing difficulties need to know what's going on. And we're making it more I think some of these things were just ignored so much in the past, and now it's coming up that, hey, we can help people be, part of things, I guess is what I want to say. You want to be part of everything.
Yes, we do. I remember last year I did have a friend who was purchasing a home and they needed an interpreter. Obviously, it's important information that's shared during closing and a purchase of a home. So there was a student from the interpreter training program at Moraine Valley who was going there to interpret for the purchase of their home under the supervision with other interpreter. So they had the interpreter there. They were able to work with them for the negotiation, but it also had another purpose of benefiting the ASL interpreting student from Moraine Valley as well.
Okay, that's almost like a little bit of an internship practice, like being a student teacher a little bit, going out and actually doing it.
Correct.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
We actually do have, similar to nursing or other practice professions, it's called field placements. So we have a educational setting field placement, and then we have 2 field placements that are in the community, where our students who are not licensed to interpret, so legally they can't, would be assigned to work with a licensed interpreter to go out and observe and then get some hands-up experience under the tutelage of a licensed interpreter. Again, very similar to nursing, where you're on your clinical placement, where you're able to do things in the nursing field, but you're always being supervised to ensure that the safety of their consumers is being protected. The hands-on experience is the most valuable part of of what we do. We can teach someone in the classroom all day long until they experience it in real life. They're not going to be able to apply everything they've learned.
And that is so true. And that on-the-job training and making sure you get it all right, you're giving valuable information, whether it's medical or, it's one thing to maybe interpret a song if you did something incorrectly, but when you're talking about medical information or mortgage information or something like that, you want really accuracy there.
I tell my students that interpreters are there in a deaf person's life on the best day of their life and the worst day of their life and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So
I do remember, excuse me.
Okay, sorry.
I had surgery, before the ADA was passed. So at that time, they were not mandated to provide interpreters. And it was an awful experience for me because I did not understand what was happening during the surgery. I had no idea what was involved. And when I woke up, I was in so much pain. It was awful. And obviously, after the ADA law was passed, I had surgery again. It was a similar situation, but I had an interpreter. So I was more informed. And when I woke up, I was in pain, yes, but it was more bearable because I understood what was involved. I understood what to expect as opposed to the previous experience where I was clueless as to what to expect. And it was traumatic.
Oh my gosh, it would be awful because you need
Yes.
to know. Knowing is makes all the difference in the world. Even if it's uncomfortable knowing and painful knowing, at least you know ahead of time what you're going to be experiencing. And that's so important. Now, American Sign Language is considered a foreign language? Okay, so do people go in and say, I'm not going to learn Spanish or German or Latin or anything. I'm going to learn American Sign Language, and I'm going to get my credits for having a foreign language. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, it does. And the funny thing is sometimes you'll have students who be like, okay, I'll take ASL, and then they become just immersed into this area of study and they change their majors.
Oh, wow. I could see that because I didn't know anything about it, and then you're in it, and you're like, I like this, I can do this. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do have a lot of students who transfer to other colleges. Sometimes we have to send, the syllabus and information similar to if you took, another language class to make sure it meets the criteria. But in general, our students transfer to state schools, out of state. We have several students who have gone to Gallaudet themselves to further interpreting education, to the Rochester Institute of Technology. Some students who are out of state at other schools who started their ASL language learning with Moraine Valley.
That's great. So it's a great either finishing point for some people, and it's a jumping off place for others. That's great.
Yes, and my favorite part of when our students take our classes is when I get emails from them that they're so excited, they were able to meet somebody on the job and they were able to use their sign language skills that they learned at Moraine Valley, and that makes me very happy.
And that's very satisfying for them too, to be able to be a conduit to somebody who needs, some support. And it would be a great field to be in. So there's free family sign language classes that start in October. And so these are for people who don't know anything or know something.
So it's targeted to members of the community who have a deaf person in their family. Statistically, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, and 90% of deaf parents have hearing children. And as you can see, you come home from the hospital and you find out your child is deaf, and you don't even know where to start. To start learning this language, you're getting inundated with medical information. And so the goal for our grant-funded classes is to provide free language education in American Sign Language for these parents and family members, extended family members, anyone who's going to be interacting with this child, so they have access to information. Because children are sponges, and if they don't have access to information in a visual language, if they're deaf, then they could possibly be deprived of language. So we want to make sure it's easy for these parents and family members to learn the language and be able to learn along with their child. it's been very successful. We have a lot of very happy families who are able to sign with their children and learn with them while they're learning their own sign language.
That is great. And it's free. They can.
If I could add something
Yes.
too. What's really important is that all of these classes are taught by deaf instructors. So then you have these parents who are taking these classes at American Sign Language. It's really important to have that modeling, that language being modeled from those deaf instructors. It helps the students and it helps the parents to be able to communicate with deaf people, and it helps them with their deaf children as well.
Is this widely known for families? I mean, are like doctors' offices and schools saying, "Hey, there's a way for you to learn American Sign Language"? Is that being communicated to families pretty well?
We do share the information. We have some connections with some hospitals, but it's really, there's a lot of many different doctors.
Right.
So we do share the information and hopefully get that information, because when a child is born, all children are tested. Their hearing is tested nationwide, and so we're hoping to get that information to the parents as soon as they find out that their child has been identified as having a hearing loss. We have a lot of cooperative agreements in schools that work with deaf children, and all of them have been informed, and they share the information with their families to be able to let them know that there's these free classes available.
Oh, that's really great. That they have the opportunity to, because that's so important. How are they going to communicate if they don't learn the second language that they need to know?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I guess I want to make sure we've covered everything people need to know about Moraine Valley's opportunities to get involved in the Deaf Education, Deaf Studies Certificate, and the American Sign Language Interpretation Program. Is there any other thing other than, I know they're going to want to know, how do I get involved? How do I do it? How do I sign up for this?
Well, the first thing you would like to do is look at the website, the Moraine Valley's website. Our program information is available online, and if you are interested, go ahead and contact admissions to be able to register for classes. If you have any general questions about American Sign Language, you can email asl@morainevalley.edu.
Okay, so they can do that. What about if someone's like kind of struggling? They're like, well, is this something that I'm capable of? I mean, there is a memory, a skill to be able to do this, a retention, and also there's an emotional component to interpreting for people. It's not just informational. So how do you know you're the right person for this?
Really, learning the language is just the first step. So the first step is to have a fluency in both English and American Sign Language, because interpreters are experts in language. And when you're interpreting between English and ASL is not based from English. So it is its own language, has its own grammar and syntax. And so you need to have your fluency in English to be able to understand the meaning, to be able to process and interpret that meaning into a different language. So that's the first step, and then once you get to that level, then you can start. Currently this semester we're in our ethics class, and this is the class where generally people, it's kind of where they decide that if they want to be an interpreter or not, because interpreters follow a code of professional conduct, and we are neutral participants. We're not there to aid or support, give our opinions, and there are some people who really want to give opinions all the time, and they realize that interpreting is not the place for them to be. So I think that's where some of the challenge comes in for folks, and they kind of learn that in the early stages in the interpreter training program. But also in the ASL Deaf Studies program, we do have a class called Working in the Deaf Community, where we do talk about the requirements to be an interpreter, their essential functions to be an interpreter, and what interpreters do. Because in general, a lot of people come and they take one sign language class and they're like, oh, I know some sign language, I can be an interpreter. They don't understand that interpreting is a completely separate skill from learning a language. So we do cover it quite often, and by the time they're ready to apply, they know what interpreting is.
Okay.
They do have a good idea, and I'm a stickler on that. So I firmly believe that people should be aware of what they're getting into. And I love interpreting, and it's definitely the job for me, but it may not be the job for everybody.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think about, Kathy over here. Just got to pay attention to the whole thing. Like, you can't be somebody who daydreams, because you've got to really pay attention and get it right for the person you're interpreting for.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. And, she has no opinions here.
I always say interpreting is like riding a bike down a hill in San Francisco while you're building the bike.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's really,
Because everything is always happening
It
all at
is,
once.
yes.
There's no pausing. So
No.
while let's say Kathy, she is listening to me speak, she is processing that information to give to Sherry, to give to Terry in American Sign Language, while still listening to me speak, because I'm not stopping.
Exactly.
So everything is happening all at once.
Right.
So it's a complex process that's not impossible to learn, but it's so much more than just knowing another language.
Yes, it really would be. Plus, you have to be skilled in a lot of vocabulary that sometimes is put out in a talk, a speech, so just information you're getting in general, where you may not know exactly what that is as the interpreter, but you have to relay that to someone else. So you better know that language pretty well.
Yes, and it is also important for interpreters to really be immersed within the deaf community. Just like any other language, if you want to learn Spanish or French, you do need to become involved in that community of individuals who use that language to understand their culture. So that is a parallel to, being an interpreter and being a good interpreter.
Yes, exactly. Well, this has just been so interesting, and I think that, if this is something that calls to you, it's really, I really feel it's like a calling, like teaching or being in the medical profession. It's a calling that you feel that you want to learn or do, or if you have a family member, of course, you're being called into learning another language. So I really appreciate all this information, both of you, Shelley and Terry, today. Anything else before we go?
Just two quick things. Throughout our program, if you do both the ASL Deaf Studies and American Sign Language Interpretation program, you will have over 300 hours of contact, observation, and experience in and amongst the deaf community, which is very important. So that's one of the key components of our program. It's built into all of our classes. And also, if you're looking at this as a profession, there's a huge shortage of interpreters. We have a heavy need of interpreters.
Okay.
Yes, there
There
is.
are probably 6 jobs right now happening without interpreters, because we simply just do not have enough people doing this. We need good interpreters. We need people to do this work. So when you graduate and you become licensed or approved to work in a K through 12 setting, you will not have a job.
Okay.
I could work probably 18 hours a day nonstop if I allowed myself to, because there's such a huge need for interpreters, and I'm sure Terry can address this as well as a member of the deaf community experiencing the shortage.
Sometimes I'll show up to a meeting and there's no interpreter, or I'll go to a doctor appointment and as a result of the shortage of interpreters, there's no interpreter there.
Yeah, that's a real need. So if this is, like I said, if this is a calling for you, that there is really a need for more interpreters, and you will get a wonderful job. And like I said, it's calling. You could feel very satisfied with your life as an interpreter. Well, thank you both, Shelley, Terry, Kathy. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for joining us today on Meet with Moraine. I hope you go out and explore the possibilities that you have at Moraine Valley Community College, because there is a whole wide open spectrum of things that you can be involved in and be interested in and have a fulfilling career in. Thanks for watching us today. See you next time on Meet with Moraine.